Buddhism and Demonology. Possibly you don't expect to find them in the same room, but Buddhist tradition is indeed full of demons and fiends. Yet it takes an approach to demonology that is anything but simple superstition. In the Buddhist time, popular cosmology teamed with yakshas, rakshasas, Buddhas, and other malevolent beings inherited from Indian folklore. But when Buddhism came along, it didn't just sweep the old world under the rug. Rather than denying their existence, Buddhism rather absorbed and reinterpreted these figures in line with its own teachings. Monks and laity across Asia told their own vivid accounts of demonic encounters. This was not to frighten believers away from the world, but to illustrate the Dharma in action. And so over the centuries, these demons were woven into Buddhist scriptures, art, and rituals, and they symbolized everything from literal ghostly threats to the very inner afflictions that impede enlightenment. So let me take you through on a journey of the shadowy pantheon of Buddhist demonology, from the legendary tempter Māra and even the child-devouring Hariti, to local ogres like the Alavaka and protective gods like the four heavenly kings. You'll see how each demon serves its own purpose, historically, spiritually, and even psychologically. It all comes with a deeper meaning and a dash of wonder. Perhaps you'll find something you did not quite expect. In any case, before we begin, let me welcome you to the channel. If you're new here or you've yet to click that subscribe button, I invite you to do so if you feel inclined. And once again, this video, along with everything else, is all ad-free for your uninterrupted enjoyment, made possible by donations on the PayPal and YouTube memberships, also Patreon, and those who want to check out the merch store. All the relevant links are provided in the pinned comment, video description, and channel description on the home page. And with all that being said, welcomes out of the way, let's begin our guide to Buddhist demonology. Well, you can't begin a guide to Buddhist demonology without Māra. We already mentioned the name, the arch-tempter and personification of delusion. Off to a pretty good start, I think. You see, in Buddhist lore, Māra is the cosmic kind of devil figure who assailed Prince Siddhartha on the eve of his enlightenment. Far from a simple satanic figure like the Christian bad guy sort of thing, Māra takes on multiple identities. You see, he is called Papima, that is evil one, Namuki, non-liberator, and even identified as Kanna, the dark one. According to early texts, Māra is both a specific being, often described as the Lord of the highest heaven in the desire realm, and also a symbol of our deepest weakness. For example, the Padana Sutta and the Sutta Nipata betrays Māra attacking the Buddha to be, not with flaming arrows or a sword or anything like that, but rather with soft and gentle words, appealing to comfort and fear. The Bodhisattva recognizes these as tricks and exposes Māra's army for what it really is, that is, sense desires, boredom, craving, hunger and thirst, cowardice, sloth and tapur, doubt, hypocrisy and stubbornness, gain and honor and ill-won fame. In other words, Māra's legions are pretty much our own human frailties. The Buddha declares none but the bravest seekers conquer such foes, vowing to shatter Māra's armies, quote, with wisdom as stone smashes a clay pot. It's a pretty powerful allegory, doesn't it? It makes isn't it rather? It makes a key point, though. From the earliest strata of Buddhism, demons like Māra are not merely external enemies, but they're rather stand-ins, kind of metaphors for your own internal battles. And I think you'll find that across many of our religious traditions across the world. But Māra is not purely metaphorical. The canon also records multiple literal visits by Māra to the Buddha and his disciples. In the Māra Samyutta, Māra lurks in the shadows, scheming to disrupt Dharma talks or frighten meditating monks. He appears in various guises, as a frightening cobra, as a charming villager, even as one of the Buddha's own cousins at one point, only to be unmasked by those who have the keenest insight. Each time, his effort fails, and he vanishes, disappointed, but always ready to try again. And there is that theme of recognizing the demon for what it is, regardless of its disguise. It reinforces a central Buddhist message, that is, by seeing through illusions, one robs them of power. The Buddha is recorded calmly advising Māra, quote, "I know you, evil one," before reiterating that Māra has no claim on one who has seen the truth. In one dramatic encounter, Māra unleashes his ultimate weapons, 3 seductive daughters, trying to tempt the Buddha with lust. Well, the ruse falls flat. The enlightened one, he remains unmoved, and the trio depart in shame. Now, these are all pretty supernatural in flavor, but they actually serve to kind of humanize the Buddha's struggles. They assure devotees that even the awakened one was tested by desire, fear, and attachment, and that we too can overcome our inner demons by cultivating that wisdom and mindfulness. But let's go beyond Māra. Early Buddhist scriptures introduce a menagerie of yakshas and rakshasas, nature spirits and ogres, that is. Now, they can either be benevolent or not so benevolent, even bloodthirsty. There is one famous story from the Sutta Nipata. It features Alavaka, the notorious yaksa, often rendered ogre or demon, with a taste for human flesh. According to commentary, Alavaka terrorized the town of Alavi, extorting a daily human sacrifice from the king. In fact, even little babies were not spared from his appetite. Now that's a real demon. Well, the Buddha heard about this cruelty. So what did he do? He didn't organize an army. He didn't pick up a sword. He didn't get angry. Instead, he walked straight into the yaksa's lair. Of course, Alavaka was pretty furious at the intrusion. He was not accepting visitors. He bellowed repeatedly, "Get out, monk!" But the Buddha was unmoved, and he stepped in and out of the demon's abode at each command, until Alavaka tried a new tactic. Quote, from the text, "If you do not leave, I will strike you down, cleave your heart, and hurl you across the river." The Buddha calmly replied that no one in the world, Deva, Brahmin, or demon, could do such a thing to Tathagata, but nevertheless invited Alavaka to ask him any question if he pleased. Now what followed is one of the most beloved dialogues in the Pali canon. Alavaka, with surprising earnestness, probably at the Buddha's disposition, posed a series of riddling questions about the essence of holy life. For example, what is a man's highest wealth? What brings the taste of bliss? How does one cross the flood of suffering? Now, the Buddha's answers were very simple, straight to the point, but quite profound. As following: faith is the best wealth. Dharma, well practiced, brings bliss. By diligence, one crosses the flood. By wisdom, one is purified, and so on. In any case, by the end, the once bloodthirsty demon is utterly tamed, not by force, but by wisdom, by dharma. Alavaka explains in admiration that the Buddha has set up right what was overturned, and declares himself a disciple, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. Thus, the fierce cannibal blood drinker turns into a protector. And that's just one other tale, plenty of them that we get from the Pali Canon, that shows this recurrent motive in Buddhist demonology, and that is not to destroy, but to convert. You see, demons, they're just kind of misguided spirits, and when confronted with truth and compassion, they can themselves be transformed into benefactors. The greatest victory, as the texts imply, is winning over a demon's heart, rather than simply destroying the malevolent presence. Now, another early figure who straddles the line between demon and deity is Hariti, known in Sanskrit as Haritika, and in Japanese, actually, you might have heard of him as Kishimojin. Heard of her, rather, excuse me. Well, her story is a poignant example of Buddhism's ability to engage with local demonic deities and elevate them onto the right Buddhist path. Hariti was originally a fearsome yaksa in Ragarha, renowned for a gruesome habit. She had hundreds of children of her own, and to feed them, she preyed upon the children of human families, abducting and devouring them. Of course, the villagers, they lived in understandable terror of Hariti, whom they called the mother of demons. Eventually, their desperate parents implored the Buddha for help. Rather than smite the child-eating ogress, the Buddha employed a skillful means tailored to teach her empathy. He quietly took Hariti's youngest son, in some versions named Priya, and hid the child under his begging bowl. When Hariti discovered her child was missing, she was thrown into a frantic despair. She searched the city high and low. At last her quest brought her, sobbing, to the Buddha's feet. And the Buddha gently observed and said, "Now you understand the pain that you have caused others. Imagine the anguish of all those mothers whose children you took." Well, Hariti was struck to the core. The Buddha certainly taught her a lesson with that one. And overwhelmed by remorse, she vowed to give up her evil ways and protect children instead of harming them. The Buddha then revealed her infant safe and sound, and Hariti's joy cemented her conversion. In gratitude, she promised to dedicate her prodigious powers to the service of the Dharma, according to scripture, in the later Mahayana texts, as well as the Vinaya Chinese texts as well. Hariti pledged to become a patroness of children and women in childbirth, ensuring that they thrive rather than suffer as her victims. Now that is certainly a dramatic turnaround. Well, the Buddha even allowed devotees to offer Hariti small sacrifices of food, since the hungry ghosts like her still needed nourishment of some sort, an acknowledgement of her liminal status between demon and deva. Over time, Hariti's image morphed from terrifying ogress to benevolent matron. In Gandhara and Mathura art, She is depicted as cradling a child or holding a cornucopia of grain, symbolizing abundance and protection. When Buddhism spread to China and Japan, Hariti, as Guizimo in Chinese or Kishimojin in Japanese as mentioned, was enshrined as a guardian spirit. The Lotus Sutra's 26th chapter has Hariti and her 10 demon daughters take a solemn oath before the Buddha. They vow to safeguard all who embrace the Dharma, especially those who uphold the Lotus teaching. This remarkable trajectory from literal child devourer to Dharma protector shows that Buddhist approach to demons again, that is to subdue the harmful impulse and redirect all of that energy towards good rather than evil. Hariti's tale, it might also carry a subtler teaching about attachment and loss, so familiar to human parents, especially of those older times. In her agony over a missing son, Hariti learned the lesson of compassion the hard way, a lesson the Buddha gently imparted to temper her immense motherly love with wisdom and non-harming. And so, to this very day, in Japan's Nichiren sect, Kishimojin is venerated as a goddess of easy childbirth and child-rearing, often portrayed as holding a baby and a pomegranate, which is another symbol of fertility. No one denies her demonic past, but rather they remember it as proof of the transformative power of Buddhist compassion. Of course, if Buddhism can convert demons like Alavaka and Hariti, it also recruited the very gods to guard against demons. The most famous of these heavenly guardians is the 4 great kings, that is, Katur Maharaja, worldly deities, who occupy the lowest heaven and stand at watch at the 4 cardinal directions. In the Pali Canon's cosmology, the 4 great kings are said to guard the earth and protect the Dharma. They are not Buddhas or Arahants, but powerful Deva rulers who have a strong sense of duty. Their names are Vesavana, that is in the north, and Dataratha in the east, Virulaka in the south, and Virupaka in the west, became legendary across Asia. Each king commands legions of spirits, Nagas, Kumbhandas, that is kind of dwarvish goblins, Gandharvas, Yakṣas, and more. Early Buddhists looked to these kings for protection from the very same demons and ill-willed Buddhas that plagued the worldly realm. One striking canonical text is the Atanatya Sutta, which is essentially a demon-repelling chant given by the 4 kings to the Buddha. The sutta recounts how King Vesavana, on behalf of his fellow kings, approached the Buddha and expressed concern that many unruly yakshas neither respect nor believe in the Blessed One. Because such malevolent spirits could harass monks and the laity alike, the 4 kings offered the Buddha a set of protective verses, that is, paritta, to be recited as a kind of safeguard. Now this became the Atanatya Paritta, and it's still chanted in Theravada communities today as a ward against evil influences. The Buddha praised this act and instructed his followers to memorize the chant. And the text as well, it even shows that even the mighty 4 kings saw value in the dharmic practice free from demonic disturbance and took it upon themselves to ensure that protection. The sutta's introduction frankly states it is a, quote, spiritual protection against evil spirits, presented to King Vesavana, or by King Vesavana rather, to the Buddha. Within his verses, the 4 kings invoke a who's who of benevolent deities, from the 7 past Buddhas to that roll call of Yaksa generals, enjoining them to keep the Dharma community safe. They even threaten punitive action against any spirit who still dares to trouble a disciple who lives righteously. In traditional Sri Lankan and Southeast Asian practice, this Atanatya Sutta is only recited on special occasions, often by monastics who prepare with ritual purity, since it is essentially a last resort exorcism formula for stubborn hauntings. Good luck getting one of them out of the house. Or more commonly, gentler chants like the Metta Sutta, that is the loving kindness discourse, are used first, reflecting Buddhism's preference to soothe and reform rather than just intimidate and dispel. But still, that role of the four kings in Buddhist demonology is pretty important. They legitimize within scripture the idea that protecting the faithful from supernatural danger is part of the cosmic moral order. In East Asia, images of these four heavenly kings stand guard at temple gates, ferocious and imposing, one bearing a sword, another bearing a lute, another a snake, another a pagoda. Each pose and emblem represents subjugation of a vice. They crush underfoot the forces of ignorance, keeping the sanctuary of the Dharma free from negativity. Now, as Buddhism spread beyond India, it encountered new cultures, each with its own host of indigenous specters. Well, instead of rejecting these as pagan nonsense, Buddhism often assimilated local demons into its cosmology, much as it did with the Four Kings and Hariti. Now, the result is a fascinating regional diversity in Buddhist demonology that you don't quite get in a lot of other spiritual traditions. Demons took on local names and forms, yet their essential function within the Buddhist narrative remained. They either obstruct the path or get converted into protectors, as examples of a dharmic victory. So let's have a look at a few regions. First, let's have a look at Japan. You see, Japanese folklore already brims with creatures called oni, that is, horned ogres, often depicted with red or blue skin, big tusks, and iron clubs. These oni were thought to haunt wild mountains and abandoned places, but also every now and then to invade human settlements and bring disease or disaster. The bad guys, basically. So when Buddhism arrived in Japan, that is 6th century CE, people soon identified many oni with the yakshas and rakshasas mentioned in the Buddhist sutras. In fact, scholars know that the Japanese concept of oni was heavily syncretized with Hindu Buddhist demons like yakshas, rakshasas, and hungry ghosts, and over time, oni came to be seen as the very same creatures that in Buddhist lore serve King Yama's hell, or roam in as malicious spirits. But far from being cast out by Buddhism, they only were given a place in the Buddhist universe. They became the wardens of hell. In Japanese they call that jigoku, and in Chinese they call it diyu, which means underground prison, essentially. Now, they would punish the wicked, and they were the manifestations of excess, greed, or anger on earth. In other words, Japanese Buddhism turned the oni into pedagogical creatures. Fearsome, yes, but ultimately part of the moral order that encourages humans to avoid evil deeds, lest they have to deal with the Oni's club in hell, not the kind of clubbing scene that you want on a weekend. Now, even the imagery of Oni evolved under Buddhist influence. The classical red and blue horned appearance likely crystallized in the medieval era, inspired in part by the Buddhist art's depiction of the Yaksa generals and neo-guardians. Some Oni are portrayed with third eye or extra limbs, echoing tantric Buddhist depictions of wrathful deities. Now, I do remember when I was about, I would have been about 20, 21, something like that, going back a fair while. I won't tell you how long. There was this great temple of hell I went to in Japan. I can't quite remember where it is. It might have been about 40 minutes outside of Tokyo. I'm sure someone listening has been there before, if it's still running, but effectively a place to scare children into being good. They have a few places like that in China as well. I'm sure they have them in India too, but it was quite interesting. Anyway, just brought up a memory is all. Now, Japan also developed unique rituals to ward off demons of their own, and they blended Buddhist and Shinto elements. The most famous is Setsubun, that is the bean-throwing festival, and that's held every Spring's Eve. To this day, families still shout Onni wa soto, fuku wa uchi, demons out, blessings in, while tossing roasted soybeans out the door, symbolically pelting any lurking demons and inviting good fortune. This custom, introduced from China in the 8th century, was early on linked to Buddhist temples and teachings. A delightful legend from the 10th century tells of a Buddhist monk at Kuramadera who was confronted by a pesky oni, but the quick-thinking monk hurled soybeans at the demon's eyes, blinding and chasing it away. Nothing hits harder than a handful of soybeans, I'm sure. Well, thus began the practice of mamemaki, that is, bean scattering to purge evil influences. By the Edo period, Setsubun bean-throwing ceremonies were celebrated at both Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples nationwide, often with monks or even costumed local men playing the part of the oni so villagers could gleefully pelt them. The oni in this context clearly represent misfortune or bad karma accumulated over the past year. Essentially, negative energies have to be expelled through a cathartic, community-wide exorcism ritual. It's a pretty good example of how folklore and Buddhism coalesced. The Buddhist temple lent spiritual authority to an old rite, framing it as a cleansing, not just of evil spirits, but also of the spiritual impurities in one's heart. Now, at the same time, the folk belief in literal ogres was reinforced by Buddhist cosmology, which gave the oni roles in the unseen realms of existence. Even today, temples like Kyoto's Yoshida Shrine or Tokyo's Sensoji host large Setsubun events, with priests and sometimes celebrities tossing beans into huge crowds. That chant of oni out, luck in. It nicely captures the Buddhist ethic that to invite good, you have to first cast out inner demons, whether that's ignorance, anger, jealousy, whatever your poison is. Japan's Buddhist demonology also features compassionate twists. Consider Kishimojin, that is Hariti, whom we met earlier, once worshipped as a fearsome goddess of smallpox and calamity, but now petitioned for protection. Certainly a career change, that's for sure. Or the 10 Rasetsu daughters, that is rakshasas in Hindi rather, who after converting in the Lotus Sutra became guardian spirits. In many Nichiren Buddhist temples one finds altars to Kishimojin and her 10 daughters, with devotees offering sweets or fruits. This isn't idolization of evil, don't get it mixed up. It's just a reminder that even demons can have a change of heart and use their powers for good. So show a little bit of mercy, I suppose. And indeed, some Japanese oni tales end with the oni taking refuge in the Buddha and ceasing their malevolence. Stories like that reinforce the idea that no being is irredeemable, a very Mahayana Buddhist sentiment. And indeed, anybody who has watched the animated series Inuyasha will definitely see these themes. A lot of the demons that they encounter, and even the character himself, Inuyasha, being a half demon, half human, something like that, is effectively, it effectively goes through those themes. And usually when they defeat one of the demons, sometimes they're cast out, sometimes they're destroyed, but a lot of the time, the story's a little bit deeper. And it turns out that, yes, those theories of redemption are pretty prevalent throughout the entire program. Remember watching that maybe 15 years ago. Now with this context, it's a lot more interesting in hindsight. Also, if you want to know more about Japanese and Shinto demonology, I've already done a full video on that. So we'll move on from Japan now in particular. Now let's look at Southeast Asia, those Theravada regions. In countries like Thailand, Myanmar, or Burma, whatever you want to call it, Cambodia and Laos, Buddhism encountered a very animated local spirit world. The people believed in myriad ghosts and nature spirits, collectively known by names as like the Phi in Thai, or the Nats in Burmese, or the Nectar in Cambodian. These range from the souls of tragically deceased humans to ancient tree-dwelling guardians. Many were considered to be dangerously capricious, or even downright malicious. I'm a poet. I didn't even know I was. Theravada Buddhism, being non-theistic, did not explicitly endorse these beliefs in its scriptures. Yet the religion bent to accommodate them, at least in practice. Now, the result is a rich syncretism where a devout Buddhist might take refuge in the triple gem and also hang amulets to appease local ghosts in his rafters. For example, Myanmar's 37 Nat spirits include Princess Peacock Maid and the Lord of the Great Mountain, both essentially ghosts of historical figures who met violent deaths and were elevated to divine status. Burmese kings long ago canonized, I suppose we can use that word, these Nats, and even hosted state ceremonies to propitiate them, recognizing that fear of demons was a social reality that certainly needed to be addressed and managed. And to this very day, you can visit Mount Popa in Myanmar and find a shrine to the Mahagiri Nats, where worshippers offer coconut and bananas to keep those volatile spirits happy. Burmese Buddhist doctrine might label such beings as petas or hungry ghosts or even low devas, but in popular religion, they are simply Nats. Not quite Buddhas, not quite demons, but certainly powerful invisible neighbors who must be respected. Well, what about Cambodia? Well, if we go there, we find a detailed classification of pretty nasty spirits that almost parallels an ethnography of the demonic. There are the Kmok, or ghosts of the dead, the Pret and Besak, which are particularly vicious demons born of those who died by violence or great sin. The Arak, often female evil spirits that cause illness, and the local Nectar, guardian genie of particular locales like a banyan tree or a crossroads. Cambodian villagers traditionally believe all these spirits demand proper respect and offerings. If neglected or insulted, they wreak havoc with illness, accidents, or madness. So where exactly does Buddhism enter the picture? Well, rather than refute these beings, Cambodian Buddhism supplies the means to contain and coexist with them. Monks are often invited to homes not just for blessing of the living, but explicitly to chant away angry spirits. They recite sutras believed to nullify wandering ghosts with loving kindness and truth. But in more severe cases, A monk or a ritual specialist might perform a rite to trap a demon in a bottle or negotiate a truce. The crew, that is one of the names for these ritual specialists, prepares a protective charm and a few amulets inscribed with Pali syllables or Buddha images to shield individuals from spirit attacks. And it's pretty telling that many crew in Cambodia are ex-monks, blending Buddhist knowledge with a bit of folk magic. The underlying message is that Buddhist virtue and mantra have authority even over ancient spirits, even ones that were there before Buddhism even came around. Indeed, the Cambodians hold that the mightiest of all nuts is Preah Torani, the earth goddess, who in Buddhist legend wrung out her hair to wash away Māra's armies when the Buddha called upon her. Thus, a local earth deity was woven directly into the Buddha's enlightenment story, giving hope that the land itself aligns with Dharma against demons. Similarly, in Thailand, we see a pretty complex picture of demonology, where Buddhist monastics engage in folk rituals. A colorful example of that is the Pi Takon festival in Loei province, the Ghost Festival, which is part of the merit-making celebration of Bun Pawet. Locals wear these ghoulish masks with phallic-like noses and dance around in procession. Ostensibly, there are ghosts accompanying the return of Prince Vesantara, the Buddha's past life, to his kingdom, a scene so uproarious legend says that even the dead come out to rejoice. Here the joyous dead are not malevolent at all, but their presence reminds participants of the thin line between worlds. On the festival's final day, everyone listens to Buddhist sermons, dedicating merit to spirits and ghosts, so that they might find peace. What a compassionate twist, The very ghosts that people fear and invited back to celebrate and then kindly sent off with a smile and blessings. In everyday Thai life, one finds a keen awareness of demons as well. From the fearsome Māra figure depicted in temple murals, Māra's assault on the Buddha is a popular motif in Thai art, to the ubiquitous Pi. Thais might refer to a particularly deluded person as being possessed by Māra, or a sudden obstacle as Māra Fet, that is, Māra's interference, showing how language of demonology permeates even the most casual of speech. Yet the remedy is usually Buddhist, perhaps a stronger observance of the precepts of protection tattoo of a yant image, or sprinkling holy water chanted over by monks. In short, Buddhism in Southeast Asia became the framework to understand and handle the spirit world. The demons are real to those who perceive them, but their power is curtailed by the superior power of Buddhist virtue and ritual. A simple village monk with a sutra in hand can become, in the eyes of devotees, a more effective exorcist than any sorcerer, because the monk calls on the truth of the Dharma, the ultimate weapon of which no demon can resist. But what about Tibet and the Himalayas? Well, in the Tantric Buddhist cultures of Tibet, Bhutan, and Nepal, we encounter perhaps the most dramatic integration of indigenous demons into Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism in particular is famous for its rich pantheon of wrathful deities, many of whom began as fierce local gods or demons that were subjugated and sworn into the Buddhist fold. The figure at the center of this process is Padmasambhava, the 8th century adept credited with firmly establishing Buddhism in Tibet. Padmasambhava's hagiographies are essentially adventure epics of demon taming. When he arrived in Tibet, the land was perceived as teeming with wild spirits hostile to the Dharma. Every mountain and river had its god or demoness, who did not want the new religion to take root. Tibetan chronicles speak of monks trying to build the first monastery, Samye, only to find their work mysteriously demolished each night by the angry spirits. Padmasambhava was invited to solve this crisis. Riding on the wind itself on the back of a flying tigress, as the legend goes, he landed in Tibet, and when he got there he challenged each demon lord on its own turf. He defeated them not by annihilation, however, but by his yogic powers and compassion to bind them with sacred oaths. One by one, the gods of Tibet bowed to Padmasambhava's epithet, that is the Guru Rinpoche, and swore to protect the Buddhist teachings henceforth. This included terrible entities like Gyalpo spirits, that is, vindictive kings' ghosts, and Mamo demons, all forced to kneel. Most famously, Tibetan lore speaks of the Supine demoness, who was believed to be the very land of Tibet itself. The geomantic story goes that Tibet's landscape resembled a giant demoness reclining across the plateau, preventing the construction of central temples. Padmasambhava and the Tibetan king together performed a grand geomantic ritual. 12 temples were built on specific pressure points of the demoness's body: shoulders, hips, knees, hands, feet, elbows, and these all pinned her down. Only then could the great Jokang temple be completed at her heart in Lhasa, and the Samye monastery over her navel. Far from seeing this as a literal murder of the earth spirit, Tibetans interpreted it as the transforming of the land's energy, taming the demoness so that her life force became aligned with Buddhist auspiciousness. And indeed, Tibetan tradition holds that once subdued, the demoness became a protectress of the Dharma. Her very body's ley lines turn into meridians of Buddhist power. Well, ever since Padmasambhava's time, Tibetan Buddhism has maintained a rich practice of demon-binding rituals. Monasteries have entire cycles of ceremonies to exorcise harmful spirits or enlist local deities as guardians. For instance, the elaborate tantric dances, cham, often feature costumed monks in terrifying masks performing the roles of the dharmapālas, that is, protective deities who subdue demons. These masked dancers were in part a message to the local populace. Moreover, the frightening forces you fear are somewhat under the enlightened control of the monks, Now, moreover, many of Tibet's wrathful meditation deities, such as Mahakala, Yamantaka, and Palden Lamo, have origin stories where they were once bloodthirsty gods or demons who were converted by great masters or vowed to defend the Buddha's doctrine. A striking case is that of Payar, originally a rogue deity captured by Padmasambhava and sworn into service. Payar becomes the oracular deity of the Nechung monastery, advising the Dalai Lamas through trances, a demon turned oracle by Buddhist sorcery. Padmasambhava is said to have hidden countless dharma, that is, treasure texts for future ages, each guarded by a spirit whom he bound under oath to preserve and later reveal the teachings. And thus, in Tibet, the line between demon and protector is especially thin. It is often the very same being, just viewed in two different phases, first antagonistic, later repentant and benevolent. Tibetan lamas, rather than exterminating the old gods, gave them a new life as perhaps a fierce guardian of a monastery or tutelary deities for Buddhist yogis. And this had a dual effect. It kept continuity with pre-Buddhist beliefs, so common folk still saw their mountain gods around, just now wearing monk robes, so to speak. But it also illustrated the Mahayana ideal that no sentient being, not even a demon is unreachable by compassion. Well, that being said, Tibetan culture retained a healthy respect for the troublesome nature of demons. Village shamans and monks alike perform rites to this day to appease landlord spirits or expel malicious influences. One fascinating tantric rite is Jod, the cutting practice, where a yogi visualizes inviting all demons and ghostly, hungry ghosts to a feast. When the feast begins, the offering of the yogi's own blood, miraculously multiplied and transformed into a divine nectar. The demons, sated and quite delighted, either become friends or at least leave the yogi alone thereafter. Here again we see the principle of confrontation through fearlessness and generosity. The practitioner literally confronts inner and outer demons by offering them compassion instead of fear. Such practices show the psychological insight of Tantric Buddhism. The hardest demons to subdue are one's own fear and one's own ego. By feeding the demons, one robs them of terror. And that's a pretty profound twist. The demon that was an obstacle becomes the very means to one's spiritual growth. Well, by now, it's pretty clear that Buddhist demonology operates on quite a few different levels. There are the flesh and blood demons of folklore, taken quite literary by ordinary folk. But as you get into the Buddhist philosophy, you see that demons are also rich metaphors for psychological states and cosmic truths. Different Buddhist schools articulate this differently, yet all concur on the ultimate goal, that is to recognize demons for what they truly are, often manifestations of our own ignorance or karma. In Theravada Buddhism, the Abhidharma philosophy doesn't comment on goblins and ogres per se, but instead it analyzes experience into mental and physical phenomena. From this view, a demon troubling you is either an unseen being within samsaric existence or a projection of your mind, in both cases conditioned by causes. Now, the Abhidharma lists various realms of existence, and that includes a ghostly realm and hell realm, though it leaves room for those fiery-eyed Petas and Yakṣas, but it doesn't dwell on them. It's more interested in the kilesas, the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion, those evil entities that possess the mind. So in a sense, these defilements are one's personal demons. The Theravada commentarial tradition sometimes makes this quite explicit. In Pali commentaries, Māra is occasionally identified with lobha, dosa, and moha, that is, greed, hate, and delusion, respectively, suggesting that whenever those arise, Māra has gained a foothold in one's heart. A famous Theravada simile compares the 5 hindrances in meditation, that is, sensual desire, ill will, sloth, restlessness, and doubt, to an enemy army encamped against you, clearly echoing that old imagery of Mara's 5-fold army described by the Buddha. Thus, even at the level of a meditation manual, demonology provides a convenient language. The meditator going to sit is like a warrior entering battle with the armies of Māra, that is, inner disturbances. And this mindset can actually really encourage perseverance. Think about it, a thought from the Buddha in the Padana Sutta, saying, "Better I die in battle now than live on defeated." Well, a meditator is urged to have similar courage against the demon of doubt or torpor. Now that's a dramatic personification, certainly, but it drives home the point that spiritual practice requires Herculean effort. It's not easy. It's not a one and done. No one clicks their fingers and gets enlightened. and no one gets enlightened by mistake. Well, Mahayana Buddhism takes the psychological interpretation of demons even further than that. The Yogacara school, for instance, suggests that all experiences are manifestations of the mind. From that standpoint, if you see a demon, it is literally a projection of some karma or mental imprint within your consciousness. Now, this doesn't mean that you can instantly just think it away. Karma has its own momentum, but it reframes the problem. The demon is in here as much as it is out there. Wherever you go, there you are, and there it is with you. One Zen story narrates a monk that was terrified by a demon that appeared in his cave each night. Finally, he worked up the nerve to address it. "Why are you here?" he asked it. And the demon replied, "I am your fear, given form. If you run, I grow. If you confront me, I will shrink." Empowered by this insight, the monk sat in meditation, turning attention inward. After some time, the demon vanished like a mist. And this is a very important tale, because it echoes the countless Buddhist teachings that our inner demons of craving, aversion, and ignorance actually create the outer demons that we perceive. But on a doctrinal level, the Mahayana texts sometimes enumerate 4 Māras to drive home the omnipresence of the demonic as a metaphor. These 4 are Skanda Māra, the demon of the 5 aggregates; Klesa Māra, the demon of defilements; Mritu Māra, the demon of death; and Devaputra Māra, the demon son of God, i.e. Māra as a deity. Skanda Māra means that our very psycho-physical constituents, that is, form, feeling, perception, consciousness, can be considered a demon in the sense that clinging to them as me or mine perpetuates samsara. And you're not going to get to nirvana like that, aren't you? Well, the old literature encourages meditators to see the aggregates as empty of self. To extend, one is seduced by the illusion of a personal self. One is under the sway of Skanda Māra. Well, Klesa Māra is a bit more straightforward. It is the personification of the afflictive emotions like greed, anger, pride, and jealousy. These are the classic inner demons that every practitioner must confront. And we might recall how Buddha in legend named Māra's daughters Tanha, craving; Arati, aversion; and Raga, passion, making plain that Māra's seductions were really just these mental poisons in disguise. Mritu Māra, the demon of death. It symbolizes the looming fear of one's own mortality, and the fact of mortality that can derail one's practice. Death is seen as a demon, not because it's evil per se, but because attachment to life and fear of death can tempt even earnest practitioners into abandoning the path. Indeed, one sutta recounts Māra approaching the Buddha when he was old and in pain, suggesting that he just give up and die. The Buddha dismisses him, resolving to teach to the very end. Finally, Devaputra Māra refers to Māra as a celestial being, essentially the lord of the desire realm, who tries to obstruct holy persons. This reminds us that even if one conquers the inner defilements, there is still the structural barrier of samsara itself, epitomized by Māra's cosmic role. In Mahayana thought, a bodhisattva must vanquish all 4 Māras to attain complete enlightenment, a fairly difficult feat to do. But it is notable that 3 of the 4 are clearly mental: self-illusion, fear of death, defilements, and while only one of them is an external deity, and even that external Māra is only effective if the internal conditions allow. You have to let Māra in. Thus, in a doctrinal sense, Buddhism brings even the grandest demons back to the mind. Everything is under our control. We just have to show a little bit of bravery. Now, Tantric Buddhism, that is Vajrayana, it adds another layer, deliberately utilizing demonic imagery as part of the path to purify the mind. In Tantric visualization practices, a yogi might visualize a wrathful Buddha form, let's say a ferocious deity with fangs and a crown made out of skulls. Not as something evil, no, but more of a manifestation of enlightened compassion in a very fierce clothing. Well, these images draw on the same palette as demonology. We're talking flames, weapons, severed heads. However, they are transmuted into symbols of cutting through illusion and guarding the Dharma. It's almost as if Tantra says, since people imagine demons, let them imagine an ultimate demon that is fully enlightened and ultimately on their side. Now this harnesses the psychological power of the demonic, raw energy, fearlessness and awe, and puts it into the service of the path of Dharma. A tantric practitioner is sometimes told to visualize every fear, every obstacle, just as a playful display of their meditation deity. If your deity is Yamantaka, the conqueror of Yama, lord of death, then death itself appears as a powerless phantom, bowing to your compassion. In effect, Tantra internalizes the demon, then eradicates it by over-identifying with a force of goodness that is even more terrifying to negativity. Now, across all these perspectives, an intriguing question emerges. Are demons real? Well, that's a little hard to say when it comes to Buddhism, because the answer that Buddhism gives us is a little bit nuanced. Yes, they are real within the conventional reality where our minds operate. Hence, the Buddha and later masters took them seriously enough to engage with them face to face. But ultimately, demons are just part of samsara. As such, they are empty of inherent existence and depend on causes and conditions, notably our own mental states. When this insight is realized, even a marauding demon army poses no true threat. Well, the Cleveland Museum's ivory carving of the Buddha defeating Māra captures this philosophically. Go and look that up. The Buddha sits unflinchingly amid a storm of demons and temptresses, because he knows that they have no inherent reality, and thus renders them completely powerless. It is a tableau of equanimity, born of wisdom. And so for Buddhist practitioners, this translates into an approach towards life's problems, our own demons, that is both pragmatic and deeply spiritual. If one is troubled by unexplainable misfortunes or psychological turmoil, one might perform rituals or seek counsel as if dealing with a real external malign force. There is benefit in that, and Buddhism provides those skillful means. But simultaneously, one is encouraged to examine one's own heart and mind, find the seeds of anger, delusion, and desire that might be manifesting as those very troubles. An ancient Buddhist commentary puts it this way: Māra seizes an untended mind, like rain enters a poorly roofed hut. The demons might get in through those little gaps, our unguarded cravings, our aversions. In the Western vernacular, we say, the devil makes work for idle hands, or the devil finds us in our weakest moments. Tending to ethics, meditation, and wisdom, that's like repairing the roof. The demons simply stay outside in the storm. And, well, just to end on a little Chinese saying, you have to repair the roof before it rains. So there you go. Demons. External manifestations of internal conflicts. Think about that. Perhaps in ending this video, you can have a little think about your own demons. What's holding you back? What's scaring you? Well, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I certainly enjoyed doing this one for you. So I'm going to thank the top-level patrons. It's Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Carey, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfenir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stefan, Kevin, HMSHH, Crystal, Dowbury, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Gugu Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Nephthys, Alexander, Gokhan, Dorsey, Benita, Claire, Gordsey, Carol, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American, Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, Are You My Mum, Rhonda, and Carrie. Thank you very much. That is it from me tonight. Going to be doing a few more videos on demonology. We already did our Shinto demonology video, so this is a nice little partner to that. Alright everyone, good night for now. Lots of love to you all, and I will see you when you feel inclined to return. Good night.